Okay, so let's dive into something that sounds, well, completely backwards. We're going to talk about the resource curse, this bizarre phenomenon where a country's greatest treasure, its natural wealth, can actually become the very thing that brings it to ruin.
I mean, really, think about that question. It just doesn't make any sense, right? But this isn't a riddle. It's the grim reality of what happened in Venezuela. And its story is a powerful and honestly a tragic lesson in how easily things can go wrong.
So yeah, we're talking about Venezuela in South America. But its story has this weird, tragic parallel with another country, all the way over in Africa, Angola. Two totally different places, different histories, but they ended up walking the exact same disastrous path.
And just look at these numbers. I mean, they're staggering. We're talking 98% of all exports for Angola coming from oil, 96% for Venezuela. Their entire economies were basically a one-trick pony. And well, that's the first huge red flag.
So this whole situation, this trap they fell into, it has a name, the resource curse. And it's not just a saying, it's a very real thing. Let's dig into what it actually is and how it works, because it's fascinating and pretty scary.
So the basic idea is this. You've got a country with tons of natural resources, right? Like oil or diamonds. Paradoxically, these countries often end up with worse economic growth than countries that have way fewer resources. It's like having a winning lottery ticket that somehow makes you go bankrupt. It just poisons everything else.
And one of the main symptoms of this curse is something called Dutch disease. Imagine a town strikes gold. Everyone drops their tools, stops farming, stops making things, and just goes to pan for gold. Pretty soon, the town is swimming in gold, but there's no food, no clothes, nothing else. That's exactly what happened. The oil boom literally killed off other important parts of the economy, like farming in Venezuela, which used to be a big deal.
And this leads to another huge problem, the rentier state. Now think about this for a second. Your government is supposed to work for you, partly because you pay taxes, right? There's a link there. But what if the government doesn't need your tax money? What if it's getting billions just by selling oil to other countries? Suddenly, that link is broken. If they don't need your money, do they really need you?
And that's the real kicker. This is where it all stops being about economics and starts being about politics. Because when a leader is suddenly handed a fire hose of oil money, they have a choice to make, a really critical one.
And the choice that leaders in both Angola and Venezuela made was to go for power over prosperity. When the oil money was gushing in during the 2000s, they didn't use it to build up their countries for the long haul. Nope. They used it to build their own personal empires.
And this chart just lays it out plain and simple. Look at the parallels. Control over the government? Check. Control over the courts? Check. Control over the military? Check. The ability to just ignore the legislature? Yep, check. Any system of checks and balances that might have gotten in their way was just dismantled piece by piece.
You know, the crazy part is, they talked a good game. For years, they used this phrase, sowing the oil, which meant using the oil money to build up other industries, but it was all just talk. I mean, listen to this quote from Angola's president. In 2015, after being in power for 36 years, he basically says, yeah, we talked about it forever, but we didn't really do anything. It's just incredible.
So where did all that money go? Well, it became a political weapon. It was used to buy loyalty, plain and simple. You support me? Here's the government contract. You oppose me? You get nothing. And the giant state oil companies, they basically became personal piggy banks for the ruling elite, with money just vanishing into accounts with zero oversight.
Okay, so you've built this house of cards. Everything depends on high oil prices, and everything depends on one person calling all the shots. So, what happens when the price of oil tanks? What happens to a system with no backup plan?
Well, this is what happens. Even though these two countries started from really different places, Angola was this post-war state, Venezuela was a democracy, their paths started to look eerily similar. They were heading for the exact same cliff. This graph shows it so clearly. Just look at that red line for Venezuela. For a long time, there were some checks on the president's power. But then, right around the year 2000, poof, it just falls off a cliff. It drops down to basically zero, right where Angola's was all along.
And here's the result of that. This is a score for how democratic a country is. And you can see Venezuela just sliding down, 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 until it ends up in the same neighborhood as Angola. A country that was once a democracy essentially became an authoritarian state.
And this wasn't just some abstract political science thing. This had a real, brutal impact on people's lives. When the economy finally imploded, Venezuela got hit with hyperinflation over 500%. Can you even imagine that? Your life savings just gone. Basic food, medicine, suddenly unaffordable.
But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be this way. This isn't some law of nature. The resource curse can be beaten. And to see how, we're going to look at another oil-rich country that made a completely different choice.
Let's talk about Norway. Because Norway looked at that same flood of oil money and figured out how to turn what could have been a curse into an incredible blessing for its people. They basically wrote the playbook on how to do this right.
So what was Norway's secret? Well, it was brilliant in its simplicity. They built a giant firewall between the oil money and the politicians. Step 1, tax the oil companies like crazy. We're talking a 78% tax rate. Step 2, and this is the absolute key, all that money goes into a separate savings account, a giant fund. It never goes into the main government budget. And step 3, the government is only allowed to spend the interest from that fund, just a tiny fraction each year. That way, the money is there forever, for everyone, not just for the politicians in power right now.
All right, so we've seen 3 very different stories, right? Angola, Venezuela, and Norway. What's the big takeaway here? What's the one thing that separates the success story from the 2 tragedies?
And this quote really nails it. The resource curse. It's not really a curse. It's not some inevitable force of economics. It's about choices, critical political choices made by leaders.
So the antidote isn't finding less oil. The antidote is building stronger institutions, things like real checks and balances, courts that can't be pushed around, a free press that can call out corruption, a government that's actually transparent about where the money is going. That's what makes the difference between a blessing and a curse.
And this is so relevant right now. As we shift to new kinds of energy, new resource booms are happening with things like lithium and cobalt. The lessons from Venezuela, Angola, and Norway are sitting right there, plain as day. The big question is, which path will these new resource-rich countries choose to follow?